Well, Chris Lloyd, it's been 4 years in a row. Modern Family has won the Emmy for Best Comedy Series, going for a fifth. And as you well know from all your years on Frasier, that would tie an all-time Emmy record. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I never dreamed I would be in the position once, let alone twice. It's thrilling, you know. We've been lucky with respect to Emmys on this show. I did not expect we would win in the first year. To be even contemplating five in a row is crazy. So I mostly just feel lucky.
I remember that first year, both you and Glee had tons of nominations, and a lot of people thought Glee might win, and a few of us thought Modern Family was going to win. What do you remember about that first competition in the first season?
Well, they had won the Golden Globe, and I think there was a certain amount of sort of good-natured, competitive, maybe trash talking between our shows at the various award shows. So that might have raised the stakes for us a little bit. We definitely wanted to win, but look, it's the first season of a show is always distinct from any other season. In the case of Modern Family, we started out making 6 or 8 shows on our stage, having no idea how they would be received, and then suddenly it was doing really well, and that was exciting, and here we are getting Emmy nominations, and it was sort of like, wow, if we actually win, that will be the ultimate validation of what we did, and so it was terribly exciting. It's probably still the high point of the series.
When you're starting a brand new show, you're working on, hiring everybody, not just cast members, but all the crew, all the writers, and so forth. How do you know along the way, hey, this one might work?
In the case of this show, I think I can tell you, it was not at the point that we wrote it, because I do remember having written the pilot with Steve and saying, I think it's a good piece of writing. I don't, for the life of me, see how this is going to be a series. And I offered it to a friend of mine for $10. I said, look, I don't, I'm proud of the piece of writing, but I don't see a series here at all. Then we started casting, and I thought, well, these are really interesting actors. These are excellent actors. Then we actually saw them together in the scenes and saw, wow, they aren't just 6 good adult actors. The chemistry among them is fantastic. Julie and Ty are really special and real together. Ed and Sophia and Jesse and Eric. And so I thought, okay, maybe $10 was a little low. And then we shot the pilot, and it was only when we screened the first cut of the pilot where I remember sort of looking around the room saying, I think this is, I don't want to jinx it, but I think this is great. But it had come a long way from 2 months earlier when we wrote the script, and I had no faith in it whatsoever.
Almost every comedy series has an A plot line, a given episode, a B plot line, maybe even a C plot line. Modern Family does not follow those rules. You basically got 3 A plot lines every week.
It's not easy to do that. Some have a little bit more depth than others, and if we have any formula at all, it might be that if we have a couple of stories that seem to be a little bit just there for the laughs, we want to make sure that the third story has a little bit more heart to it. But we do feel that I think our audience expects sort of weighty stories for each of our adult cast members, and that makes it tricky, especially as we've added, cast members. So we are servicing now 11 speaking parts every week, which is tough in 21 minutes.
And in terms of mapping out from week to week to week, who's going to be sharing time, because there are some natural combinations like you just mentioned, but then we'll see combinations of maybe a Julie and a Jesse one week, or I'll tell you one I've been looking forward to ever since the first season, and every time we have Ty on, we talk about it, and we both complain about it, and that's you've never combined Ty and Eric in a single storyline.
I could probably open a file behind me and show you, 12 bad attempts at Phil Cam stories. We had them break into a house one time. We had them buy a pot-bellied pig one time that got loose. I don't know why. We have the same impulse that we want to put those guys together, because in a long-running series, you're always looking for new dynamics and new combinations of characters to throw together, and they seem like such naturals, but for some reason we haven't been able to quite find it. But we will. I guarantee you, we will see more of those too before we're done.
He said he thought you were all afraid that what overruns you might have and the time involved by putting those two together.
because they would ad-lib so much they would leave no room left for the rest of the cast. That's possible.
I think it was something along those lines, but I don't think your folks ad lib a whole lot. But maybe it was just stretching things out too much and having a having maybe too good of a time.
Well, that's never a problem for us if our actors are having too good a time. But it's true. They would what would be a 1 minute scene would certainly be a 4 minute scene by the time those guys were done with it.
I'm also interested in guest stars. You have a nice blend over the years of people that are already well known and people that we don't know that well. When you write a script, how do you have certain people in mind, or how do you mix those two together, the well-known guest stars and then the not so well-known?
Well, we've been very lucky. There's been a number of sort of higher profile actors that have expressed interest in being on our show, and that's a tremendous luxury, and it's something that we always turn down with a certain amount of trepidation. A reason for not having a lot of guest actors is that it starts to intrude on. You can't have, Dustin Hoffman playing a school teacher and not have people say, "Why does our school teacher look like Dustin Hoffman?" So we do that sparingly. But occasionally we will have a part that is written for someone. For example, last year in the Las Vegas episode, we knew we had to have this sort of officious, very proper British butler through whom a lot of the action runs, and we thought Stephen Merchant would be hilarious, and we were lucky enough to have him be available on that week. But more often than not, we just cast the best actor we can find.
Well, speaking of that one, we talked to your director, Gail Mancuso, last year's directing winner, and talked to her last week, and that was her nomination for this year. I told her that was my favorite episode of any drama or comedy series from this past year. I love that, and it harkened back, in my opinion, to your Frasier days, more of a farce. Just tell us a little bit more about that Las Vegas episode.
I'm pleased to hear you say that. That is truly one of my favorite episodes we've ever done here. It started out with us just saying, let's try to do a farce. What's the best way to do this? We can take them to Las Vegas. Maybe we do an episode without the kids in it. We said, well, why don't we set them in 3 adjoining hotel rooms, because that's sort of a traditional farce setup, a slamming door farce with lots of exits and entrances. And then it was a matter of, like, how many complications can we toss into this thing to keep the ball rolling, because that's a farce needs to sort of gather speed, and once it's really going, it needs to be breakneck all the way to the end. It was probably the hardest story for us to figure out over the last 2 or 3 seasons. I think we spent about 3 weeks mapping that one out. And we did have some hesitation about it because those are really hard to pull off. We did do a number of them on Frasier. Frasier had sort of a theatricality in its nature more than this show does. It as a multicam, you're already on a stage. Those guys played a sort of kind of an archness just in their characters, which lent itself to farce more than our show does as a single camera, and it has a little bit more reality to it, Modern Family does. So we weren't sure that it would quite translate, but once we got the script set up and in the right way, and the actors read it once, I think this is going to be great, and the actors love doing it. So that remains one of my absolute favorites we've done.
Well, that maybe be a goal now, is to try to do maybe one farce a season. Now that you know you can do it.
Well, believe me, it's a tall order. You spend so much time figuring out the minutia of those entrances and exits, and who's thinking what at what time, and how do you plan certain things and have them pay off later on. That they're tough to come by. But we have a Thanksgiving episode this coming season that's probably as close to Las Vegas as any we've done prior to it. So maybe once a year, maybe something close to that.
So when you have a Frasier that's a multicam and you've basically got a big stage, that's more like a theater production, like a play, and it's a little easier for the audience to see it all laid out.
I think that's right. I mean, we were on a stage, and when we did farces on Frasier, it might be that they're all off at a ski lodge together, for example, which is a wonderful episode, and you sat that set front and center in front of the audience and let the actors rehearse it like a play. With our style of, single camera, it's just a little bit trickier. But yeah, the actors on Frasier, I think, have done a lot of farces on stage and really primed for that.
Well, now that you've been just as successful on both, Do you have a preference? Do you like the multicam, or do you like the filmed comedies better?
I love them both, honestly. I in my career only worked on multicams for maybe 20 for Modern Family, so I was nervous about what this was going to be like. I have discovered that getting a chance to be on a stage and do multiple takes of scenes and really work with the actors and refine things is a huge dimension that you don't have in multicam. But multicam has a thing that I do miss, which is the rhythm of the week. You are reading on day one with the actors, you do a rewrite. Day two, it's on its feet for the first time on the stage. It's getting a little closer. You're feeling the progress toward day five when the audience is going to come in. And then finally that day comes and you're all kind of nervous and excited to put on this play, and you get the instant gratification of having the audience laugh, or the instant shame of having them not laugh. But the rhythm of that is really fun.
Let's go back to Frasier for a moment. Five-time winner, comedy series, no drama or comedies won 5 except for Frasier. Was that an expectation for that first season? I don't remember what the layout was. I know Seinfeld had won the year before, and that was its only win, it turned out. What was the expectation going into the Emmys for Frasier's first year?
I remember being somewhat confident, but you never a certain amount of attention from critics. We were doing fairly well on the radio. Always a little bit of a predilection toward the new darling Mac. Or no, and for me that was my first experience. Did I lose you?
You froze up for just a second, but I think we're back. A good question in our chat room about Modern Family from Valerie. She wants to know, she says, the kid actors on this show are fantastic. What are your plans for them as they continue to grow up?
Hopefully to find a way to reverse the process, because we really liked them small, and it's getting hard to write for them as teenagers. It actually isn't. They're becoming more complicated, and they're becoming new characters. Manny at age 10 in the pilot had certain quirks and was a particular character that he is no longer at age 16, but at age 16 he will have a girlfriend this year, for example. So that's kind of a new thing to explore. His girlfriends up until this point all been kind of theoretical, and now there's one that's actually three-dimensional, so that's new. Alex is heading off to college. Haley, her parents' house, and feeling a little. That's a new side to her characters. So it genuine stories, because kids do change as they grow, and your parenting challenges change along with them.
Do you have a goal in mind, a certain number of seasons, a certain number of years that you're already thinking for the show?
No, we do have a goal in mind, which is that we may have some say in when we go off the air, because you don't get that very often. We did have that on Frasier, for example, and it was really a pleasure to be able to write the final chapter. The final chapter is usually a phone call and tears, having been through that. So whether that's 2 years or 3 years, I don't know. Some of that's in the hands of the ratings gods, but if we have a chance to plot out, that would be great.
The nice thing about that, too, on Frasier was you really had some nice arcs. You had Martin, the father, falling in love, getting married. You had the whole baby with Niles and Daphne. You had Frasier getting together with Laura Linney. I mean, you had some nice arcs you could put together over a whole, quarter of a season, half a season, a whole season.
We did. I think at a certain point we said, how are we going to bring all this around? And then we sort of said, okay, well, the traditional Shakespearean endings are either a birth, a death, or a marriage. Let's do all three. So we had Niles' marriage, Niles' baby being born. We had Martin's marriage, and we had essentially the death of Frasier's radio career as he left that job and went off into the sunset.
On Modern Family, talk through, just, I think people enjoy hearing the process of things. You have a break after it ends in the spring, after shooting ends in the spring, and then I guess you and all the writers get together and start plotting out storylines for the year?
Right. We don't tend to have too many preconceived ideas at the end of one season as far as what we're going to do the next year. So we come back in maybe mid-May. Everybody's a little refreshed from having had 6 or 7 weeks off. And we just start talking, what do we want to see these characters do? Do we have any ideas about season-long arcs or small arcs? Last year, the big arc obviously was Mitch and Cam's engagement and then wedding. But it might have to work for Jay this year. Or let's have Cam go back to work first as a music teacher, and then we thought it would be interesting to have him become a coach because we've played Eric as a former football player. So you essentially knock these ideas around in broad strokes, and then eventually you start breaking some stories, which is basically people sitting in a room together for 3 or 4 or 5 days, working out every step of the story until you feel good about it, and assigning that then to one writer, and then moving on to the next one, and another 5 days on that story, send it off, and eventually that first writer comes back with an outline, which might be a 10 or 12-page version of that story, fleshed out a little bit, some dialogue, some nuances. We all look at it again, make some notes on it. That person goes off and turns it into script form. Eventually that script comes back, we read it, we adjust it, we then have a table reading. By this point we're in August. And then based upon a table reading, we do our final rewrite, and then we go into production the following week. But we're sort of, that's the assembly line for any number of scripts. So for example, this year we came back middle of May, and we had about 13 or 14 written or in.
It paused there for just another second, but that's okay. I love table read stories. Tell me the funniest table read you've ever attended on any of your shows.
Oh, God, who knows? I mean, there's a liveliness to them, because, particularly in Modern Family, because our actors aren't all of them around each other that often. We shoot in a sort of modular fashion, so Ed and Sophia do a lot of scenes together, or if Ed happens to be in a scene with Julie Bowen, fine, but he's not around all of his castmates so often, except at the table reading. So there's a lot of, practical joking and loud voices and actors trying to get attention from each other because there's 100 people watching them. And it's all fun. I can't tell you what the funniest one we ever had was, but they're all very very lively and often gross.
Off of that, though, on any given week, you could tell a lot about, oh, this one's in really good shape, or this one needs more work, or those kinds of things.
You can. I think you can tell what jokes work. I'm not always sure you can tell what stories work. There is an enthusiasm in that room at the table reading where people love. We have a lot of invited guests that come, maybe 20 or 30 every week, and they're often sort of entranced to be in the presence of our cast. So they'll laugh at just about anything. But, the writers are there as well, various department people. So as I said, there's maybe 100 or 125 people there. You get a sense of what jokes are working and what aren't. You don't always get a sense of what the real strength of a story is, the real emotions in them, until you see the actors perform them on their feet. Now that was a benefit to multicam, because you can have your table reading and by the next day you have a rehearsal and the actors are playing the scenes and you say, wow, well, that worked at the table yesterday, but now that they're doing it, that just doesn't seem real. I don't buy that. And you get a chance to change it because you get 3 more days till you film it. On a single cam, you have to sort of challenge yourself a little bit to say, were we laughing at that just because it was funny or because we liked hearing that actor say those words, or were we really believing in the scene? And oftentimes we have to write away from things, even though they might have gotten a good laugh at the table, because there wasn't really enough integrity in the scene yet.
Back to the Emmys for a moment, and then we'll wrap up in just a moment. When I was putting together all my research for Fox and ABC to get ready for the interview, we thought this was the case, but we were just double checking. You've won 9 producing Emmys for comedy, and I looked at comedy and drama together, and that's the most by anybody. David E. Kelley has 8. All of his but 1 are in drama. And so you win another one this year, that'll be 10. You'll be even further jumping out there. But people right behind David E. Kelley that you know well, Glenn and Les Charles, Stephen Bochco, James L. Brooks, a lot of really great names. What does that mean for you in terms of just I know each year's individual and so forth, but just what do you think about that and your legacy and your career?
This honor, I attribute to found myself on. I mean, Frasier was a great team. Modern Family is a great team, and when you're lucky enough to be on a show from the beginning, as I have been, people want to come and join what's already a good team and make it better. So I think that's a lot of why sometimes shows have streaks, such as these 2 shows have had. In terms of those other people, I mean, I truly look at that list and say I don't know how I belong on that list because I've admired all of those people for such a long time, and I feel a little guilty to even be sharing the bench with them. But it's tremendous. I never dreamed I'd be in this spot.
I told Ty we were just when we were finishing up his interview, I said, and it occurred to me while we were talking to him, I said, I would love to see Kelsey and David come out and present that comedy series award. Whether you win or not, if you win, it's like a hey, welcome to the club, your whole group, not just you. And if you don't, they can kind of smirk a little bit and say, hey, you didn't get to join us this time.
Well, I like one of those scenarios just a little better than the other. I think on Frasier one year we had Ted Danson was the presenter. It might have even been the 5th year. And I thought, oh boy, this is set up for something great, but it's also set up for something really bad if this doesn't work out. So I'm not sure how I feel about that possibility. I also frankly think of us as probably being underdogs this year. So my hopes aren't too high, but we'll see. It's lovely to be in the conversation at all.
Either your 4th time winning or your 5th, I can't remember which. Dick Van Dyke, I know, presented that award, and you were either tying his record or surpassing his record at that time.
That could be. That sounds right. I don't remember which year that was, but he was very gracious in any case.
Oh, he always is. Hey, I wanted to ask you a question about your father, David Lloyd. I'm a big fan of his work. I do a separate page that I compile every year on people I think should be in the TV Hall of Fame that aren't, and he's always at the top of my list. I would love to see him get in there. He wrote the famous Chuckles Bites the Dust episode for Mary Tyler Moore, and so many good episodes for so many shows. In fact, when I mentioned the other day that I was interviewing you, somebody said, oh, whenever I saw David Lloyd's name on the beginning of an episode, I always knew it was going to be a good one. Talk about just growing up around the comedy business through his eyes.
Well, I mean, he approached it methodically and as a serious thing. I mean, first of all, to the Hall of Fame thing or whatever, I do think he belongs there. I think there's sometimes a bias toward producers and away from writers because there are some people that sort of position themselves to stand above a show, and some of the people that do the actual hard work and brilliant work on shows get a little bit less credit. And I think he was in that category because he never really wanted to be a producer. He just wanted to write, and he wrote a ton of episodes. He said, I'll come to the right room a day or 2 a week to help you guys, add jokes to things, but mostly I want to write scripts. And he wrote 36 Mary Tyler Moore episodes and 20 or 30 Cheers episodes and on down. And he wrote fast, but he was very, very meticulous. And I think that's what I got from him, that you have to have pretty serious work ethic and pretty serious work environment, and don't underestimate your audience, right up to your audience, and good things will follow. I mean, it wasn't like the house we were running around chasing each other with big bladders and, flugelhorns. I mean, it was a fairly normal household. But he did impart, some wisdom, I guess, about writing. You know, characters should always have a goal. You should have a suggestion that these characters have a life beyond just what they might be talking about or thinking about in a particular story that week, things like that. And you would also come home talking about the rewrite room and the life of the world of being a comedy writer, which was sounded pretty good. Not always good. It's very competitive. There's a lot of smart, funny people jockeying for a position. But when he would come home and talk about great jokes or problems that they have, no one could solve them, and then someone came up with a solution to a particular scene, I thought that sounds cool. That's like doing a pod. That was a message received.
Well, I would love to see him get in that Hall of Fame. I would also love to see Jay Sandrich get in the Hall of Fame. I just am such an admirer of both of them, and can't believe they're not already in there.
Agreed. As someone who attended a lot of those Mary Tyler Moore filmings as a child, including Chuckles Bites the Dust, I saw Jay Sanders direct. He didn't actually direct that episode. He chose not to direct that. And I had a chance to work with him briefly later in my career.
Well, thank you so much. Good luck. I mean, this is a huge record that might be set, as you well know, and we'll be watching for that on Emmy night this year. And really appreciate your time.
It was my pleasure. Happy to do it anytime.